Everyone, it's Tuesday, December 20th at 7:30 p.m. We're going to call this regular meeting of the Darien Board of Finance to order. First item on the agenda, as always, is public comment. No, we don't have any guests here in the audience that are not related to things on our agenda. Jen, have we gotten any emails?
We have not.
Okay, so we'll move on. So the first item on our agenda is to discuss and take action on an appropriation and bond authorization for the Darien Fire Department for a heavy rescue truck in the amount of $2,006,000. By way of background, just to remind everybody, up until 2019, we had traditionally funded fire apparatus by sort of reserving cash, approximately $500,000 out of each one of our annual budgets, and sort of depositing that in the fire apparatus reserve. And that's typically what we had used to fund new fire apparatus, when it came due. In 2019, we sort of suspended funding that into the reserve. I think, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, 2019 was the last time we made a deposit? Or maybe 18?
I think so. 19 or 20.
19 or 20. And we decided at that point for larger vehicles and so forth to explore and to use bonding. And so one of the reasons why this item is in front of us today as opposed to like the traditional budget season is that in order to purchase the fire apparatus with bonding, we need to approve a bond resolution. The Board of Selectmen did on November 11th, I believe. And a little bit out of our normal cadence, the RTM approved it on the December 12th RTM meeting before the Board of Finance approved it. And so now this item is before us tonight. So I've sent you around materials, some of which I sent around relatively recently here as Chief Manforti and others had kind of sent across some materials. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce the Darien Police Chief, Fire Chief, and have you just give us a little bit of background, if you could, Brian, on how this developed. And
so the Darien Fire Rescue now is currently in 2004. We've been having a lot of issues with it. It is coming during the process. If we are able to purchase a new truck, by the time everything switches over, the truck will be 20 years old. The truck was a Salisbury Spartan E1. The manufacturer went out of business during the build, which created some problems down the road for us. There are items on the truck that are proprietary, which are no longer manufactured. We've been doing our best to try to keep the truck operating, running, and working efficiently. We still do have several problems with the truck, and we've removed it as a first due motor vehicle accident for I-95 and around town to a second due, and we roll one of our engines first. Mainly because some of the scene lighting on there doesn't work, and it's very costly to repair that. And we're having some lighting issues, some drivetrain issues, some corrosion issues on the frame. And some of you know that I am the Darien town mechanic, so I do know a little something about the vehicles. And we're at the point now where it's getting tough to even get anything repaired on the vehicle, and there's huge cost to any repairs that we do. So my best recommendation is, from my knowledge, to replace this vehicle and get something new that a manufacturer's still in business and we're able to get parts. So I know some of the questions that came up about the vehicle, its intended use. So this vehicle would respond to any type of rescue calls, whether it be a car stuck in the water, confined space, motor vehicle accidents pertaining to I-95, any little local roads, any type of special calls that would, a kid locked in a car. This would be the vehicle that would respond to that. It's going to have the tools for that. Electric vehicle fires. We're putting some equipment on that are specific to electric vehicle fires. One of the things I wanted to touch base on was the confined space. We were also requesting, on the top of the $1.7 million for the vehicle, we're requesting some additional equipment, and one of them pieces of equipment is a confined space air cart. This would bring us up to a new standard for any confined space with the sewer departments, any manhole entries that they'd have to go to if there was a rescue needed or a situation that arose that we would have to go in there, we would have the additional equipment to be able to perform the task. So that's very important to get into that level. One of the other things that was talked about was the resale of the old vehicle. Is there a value to the vehicle? Yes, there is. Unfortunately, it's tough to put a number on something because the markets are crazy right now. So I don't know where the value of the vehicle is going to be. I would like to hope it'd be somewhere in the $200,000 to $250,000 range 2 years from now. Unfortunately, I can't really give you an accurate number. It's very difficult to do in the way the market's been going. I've been watching a lot of the vehicles that we've been selling. They're going for a lot higher prices than I would have ever thought could happen. So it's one of those things, it's a variable that I won't know until we get closer to the time frame. If we are approved for the truck, we will post the truck 6 months prior to the delivery of the new truck. That'll give us some time to get it out there on the market so it's not sitting around. I know there was questions about the additional equipment. So normally, we would take a lot of the equipment off the truck and refit it onto the new rescue. One of the problems we have is the extrication equipment that's on the truck is no longer supported, is no longer manufactured. And there's a limited time frame on the support for that. I was told it could be supported from 5 to 7 years. If we're looking at 2.5 years, 3 years for delivery of the truck, that would give us 2 years of shelf life left on the equipment. So in my opinion, the best interest is to purchase the new equipment with the truck, put it on there, so we're not taking old equipment, putting it on the truck, then taking it off and then remounting new equipment. I would be going for the equipment either way at that time frame. So, we have about 700 hours of time into speccing this truck, so there is a lot involved. There was a lot of planning. There's a lot of discussion of how we came about to this particular truck. We feel that this truck is the best needs for the town of Darien. I know that we also had a consultant come in and discuss and review the entire fire service. And I know that one of the recommendations was that this was a good vehicle for Darien's needs. Is there anything that I'm missing that you want me to?
Yep. Brian, maybe just as we think about it from a financial perspective, maybe if you could just give us a little bit of a recap in terms of what the process is when you identify the need, because this truck was discussed close to 12 months ago when we were looking at the fiscal 23 budget cycle. Just a little bit of kind of how it developed, how you create sort of initial specs, how you create the broader set of 100+ pages that you shared with us, and how and when you go out to bid and how that process works. And I think you also mentioned either in the summary or as part of the Board of Selectmen meeting that there's also a sort of group that we bid through, or a consortium that we bid through. So if you could just help us sort of understand the financial process, like when does pricing get locked in, when does the bid get signed, kind of how was it developed,
Okay.
and what the benefits are of the consortium that we bid through.
So I know that there is a document floating around, and I believe it was $919,000 was the original estimated cost for this rescue. Unfortunately, how that process works is, as it was explained to me, that is based upon the old rescue purchase back in 2004, and then every year they add a percentage to it to create that number for future purchasing. Unfortunately, I don't think the numbers were in line over the years as they were updating it. we've talked to a lot of manufacturers, we've talked to a lot of other departments that purchased similar vehicles to what we're looking at. And they were basically in the same ballpark, you know, when it came about purchasing the truck. Where's it going with this?
How does the actual process work in terms of developing that full 100-page, you know, sort of spec sheet, and how does it work with the consortium bidding?
So what we did is we got together, we figured out our needs. And we sat down with a couple representatives, we went to multiple manufacturers. We discussed how we wanted to have the truck fit our department, and only 2 manufacturers came back to us who were interested in it, and only 1 manufacturer actually came back with a price. Fortunately, they're part of the HDAC network, which is a cooperative buying network that we already use currently to purchase other vehicles in town. Just like the big plow trucks we use, the Peterbilts, the Freightliners. It's the HDAC network that, it's a cooperative buying network. Upon purchase of this vehicle, it's COD, so we're not obligated to put any money out until we receive the vehicle.
And that's different than our prior purchases, right?
Correct. We would have to put down
25%.
Sometimes it'd be 25%, it could have been more. Currently, the new bidding process is, it's COD, so.
So it's COD, and we lock the price on the date of the contract signing.
Correct. So we are out to bid again with this right now. I will be receiving the final numbers. The $1.7 million that I'm requesting will cover the cost of that vehicle, but I don't have the specific number because unfortunately, they only give me a 30-day window here, and we've been in this process for several months now. So every time we went out to bid, it's a big process. So we basically came up with the number to work with instead of continuing to rebid it every month. I believe we're gonna see that at the end of the week.
Yes.
So I'd be happy to get those numbers to you guys, you know, at the end of the week for the actual number. But after talking with the representative, we determined that 1.7 would cover the cost of the vehicle, and I'm hoping that it's gonna come in less.
Okay. And Brian, as you, oh, sorry, Dave.
No, I was just gonna check, so we signed contract for the vehicle, effectively as soon after the final approval occurs. When do you have to, you know, submit bids or purchase the equipment, or is that the purchase of the equipment, is that same time, or do you go to a different supplier for that? How does that work?
So some of the equipment is a different supplier. The truck is its own piece of the pie there. As far as the equipment goes, I don't have an actual time frame on that for all of it. I know that the one purchase, which was $125,000, I'm able to purchase that at that number now, but wouldn't take delivery of that equipment for, I believe, 18 months.
Yeah, they're giving us grace on that.
So there'll be a time gap before they build it, but I'll be able to lock in the pricing for that. Unfortunately, every month I'm just seeing massive increases on everything.
So when you say purchase it now, you mean lock in the price, but you'd still pay for it upon receipt?
Correct.
Okay.
That'd be a COD purchase as
All
well.
right, perfect, yeah, just making sure.
So Brian, back to the actual, the truck, the chassis, the box, if you will, and systems. How does the actual cooperative, how does the bidding work? Because effectively this is going to be a single source bid. We're going to go out to one party, right? And they're going to provide us a bid. How does the benefit of the cooperative work, and to make sure that we're getting, you know, effectively scale pricing?
So these cooperative buying networks, we're actually part of a couple of them, the NJAP, the HDAC. These networks they basically go out and do all the footwork. It's almost it's similar to being like on a state bid contract where they go out, they have all the manufacturers bring it back in, and then they would win a section of that bid. Seagrave actually happened to win that section of the bid, which was good. It was also one of the top manufacturers we were looking at. And it's a sole source because we don't have to go to the traditional bid. they've already been approved as the lowest bidder for that contract.
But I guess, and maybe help me out here, but how do we know that they're like the lowest bidder? Are they regulated as, to be part of this network? Do they need to agree to some type of cost plus mechanics? Like, how do we know the bid, particularly for a truck that's very custom like this, as opposed to a ladder truck or something else that's a little bit more, I guess, stock, if you will? Like, how are we ensured that the price that they're charging us is competitive? Because like this truck is very much spec'd out for Darien, as opposed to, again, maybe it's not the right term, but an off-the-shelf, 70-foot ladder.
When you get into these vehicles, more times than not, they're all custom made. There really isn't a stock item for anybody. Everybody has a little bit different needs. When I say the truck's custom built for us, it is a manufactured chassis, it is a manufactured body, and the customization is the compartment layouts, adding a couple different doors in different spots. But for the bulk of the truck, it is pretty standard. The customization comes to where we want this light mounted, where we want this flashlight put in, how we want this door handle to turn. That's where the customization comes in. Fitting the equipment into the body, that's when I say it's customized, that's our custom needs. But it is a pretty standard, the motor, the transmission, the drivetrain, the cab, it's pretty much all standard across the board. They have 3 different models of the cab. The couple different variations of the body. As far as the network and how that all comes about, I would actually have to ask Kate. I don't know.
I can speak to it a little bit. When we join those, Kate and I review what the cooperative bidding process is. And so we make sure that it's satisfactory to what our bidding process would be and is an acceptable substitute before we join and allow departments to purchase off of those networks. And for something like fire trucks, one of the big benefits is these cooperatives are either regional or national. In Connecticut, even if it was a state bid, we don't, as a state, buy enough of those to have a real volume discount. But when you start looking at a regional or a national cooperative, they do purchase enough that for a manufacturer, they can get some economies of scale in the pricing.
So are the actual, if you will, employees of that cooperative, the staff there, are they working with us to look at our spec sheet to make sure that what, like in this case, Seagrave is offering us is competitive to what they're offering the other 100 or 200 different departments, if you will, that are in that cooperative? Like, how do we know that they're...
Here's another way to ask. What does Seagrave commit to the cooperative that enables them to be the selected supplier for this kind of vehicle?
Well,
So what are they committing? Is it, as you mentioned earlier, cost plus? Because you can't just say, even though it's a lot of it is standard, the overall price reflects the customization on top of that standard body and chassis, right? Cab and chassis. So they can't say we're going to give it, everybody's going to get it at this price, right? So what do they commit to the cooperative that allows them to be selected?
That I don't know, because this is the first fire one that we've done.
It would come on the base of the vehicle.
Okay.
You're starting out with a baseline vehicle, and that's what would win the contract.
Okay.
Everything beyond that is additional
Got it. Okay.
cost to do the.
So if New Canaan was going to buy one, or Easton, Pennsylvania was going to buy one, and basically the same model, they were all part of the same cooperative, they'd all get the same price on those basic attributes of the vehicle.
So if we all pick the same cab and chassis, the same body, we
Yeah.
would all get the same price
Thank you.
across
Okay.
Got
across
it,
the
okay,
bottom.
understood.
Bingo.
Where things change is when you start modifying
Sure.
things and try, moving compartments and shelves and adding some stuff. That's where the customization comes in, and the increase in everything. But as far as that goes, you're starting out with a baseline that everybody's on, so they won that part of it.
So can we easily get a quote on that baseline unit every year so that we can more accurately keep track of what it's going to cost to replace these trucks?
So ladders and rescues are a little bit different. As far as the engine goes, and I'll get with the fire marshals to talk about what's on the list and what numbers are on the list and the prices and everything. I talked to a lot of departments, Norwalk Fire Department, New Canaan, Greenwich, Stanford. I know what the cost of an engine is. I know what the cost of a tanker is. When it comes to the ladders and the rescues, it gets a little tricky, but we're definitely gonna have to look at updating those numbers so they're more accurate with what we have going on now. I mean, back in 2006, I think we paid $450 or $500 for an engine. You're looking to spend about $900, $950 for an engine right now.
And Brian, I think I misspoke before. I think the engine is what is a little bit more standard. It's the ladder and the rescue that are become more customized for whatever the use is, right?
Correct.
So when you look at, what was the, and not that the starting price is ever something that would ever fill all the needs and so forth, but that starting price, is that something that's like available to all the members of the cooperative, like that you can log on and you can see, this is what the starting price is of a heavy rescue, this is what the starting price is of a,
You know where the
of an
baseline
engine?
was that it started at?
It's a little difficult to get because there's a lot of baselines to start with. So you kind of have to pick, you have to have an idea of the truck that you're gonna build. And, you know, like at the beginning of this, we were actually looking in a slightly different direction by the time we were discussing whatnot that led us to this. So it's difficult to predict the baseline you're gonna use for a truck 20 years from now. You know, it's something we could try and certainly get closer than what we've been doing, but to get you know, pretty accurate, and I'm not sure what kind of accuracy you're trying to get to, but it's all time. It can be done. It's just what time we have to put into it, and we have to
I
just
think
accept that there
your
is.
point, you're just looking to know, is there a database that they can access to
Yeah.
determine? But
But also modify the
But
process.
just to be clear though, what I think Jim is asking is, if you have an idea what baseline you're starting from, there is a database that you can go to figure out what the price for that baseline happens to be.
Yeah, we could definitely find out what
Okay.
the starting baseline was.
Yeah, that's
I mean, if we could-
that's how I
yeah,
interpreted your question.
exactly. And whether that baseline, listen, you know,
Whether-
just like looking on their website, maybe there's 3 different baselines of a rescue truck, and it's maybe 1.3, 1.4, 1.5, and we have to add additional equipment that might not always be replaced. But I think if we knew sort of what some of those baselines were for various parts of the trucks, now that we're thinking about bonding, and even as we as a town think about planning our capital needs, I think, you know, we have been, I don't want to say caught off guard or like surprised, but some of these trucks, you know, prices really fluctuate a lot. And so it would be good as we look at I think we have 18 or 19 trucks throughout town, to have an idea of kind of what the replacement cycle will be, because I'm not sure, particularly in this day and age, that just applying like a 3% inflation number to what we paid in 2004 is probably not the best way to project what we're doing.
To build on, I think, what Taylor was saying is, so, yes, you can go out, or the fire commission can go out and say, okay, here's a replacement cycle. You know, let's update the estimates on this schedule. And you can go out and do that, and it'll be a better set of estimates than we have now. But I think further than that, we have to have a system that does that regularly, does that at least annually, so that annually the schedule of apparatus that's, you know, that goes into the future has the best available information as to what it costs. And we know it's going to be different on the day it's actually purchased, but it reflects the best information we have at the time the schedule is put together. And I think we can do that one time for this schedule, but I think we need to have a process in place to make sure it's done regularly.
I thought the price was fixed when the contract was signed, no?
I'm talking about the various apparatus.
He's talking about the other
I'm talking about
trucks
estimating the
to
cost of
maintain a
future
forward
apparatus
capital
purchases.
Plan, right?
'Cause if
Well,
you're-
but there are implications to that. Should we be doing more detailed planning right now for the other trucks that are on the schedule?
Well, that's what I'm.
That's what
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
That's
Like, for
what I'm
instance,
saying,
we
yes.
know Norotan and Norotan Heights each have a truck in the next couple years, a year or two, that'll likely need to be replaced. I think one is I think maybe they're both engines, I believe.
Yeah.
So I think having an idea about, for instance, with a cooperative, what a traditional 8-person crew engine is speccing out at, I think that's more helpful for us to put into our forecast of projected capital outlays over the next, kind of 3 to 5 years, to better estimates than just going back and projecting from the old. One question around this whole cooperative here, and maybe around Seagrave itself, is will this be the first Seagrave truck that we have?
No, our ladder at the station is a Seagrave 2012, which we actually took the boom off of the old, it was a 79, I think, Mack. We took the ladder part off and refitted it onto the Seagrave. So that's actually it was maybe a 72. It's a 2012 with a 1972 boom on it, but that's been in service for almost 10 years now.
And do we know, I know you all volunteer with Darien, but do we know, do any of the other fire departments in town also use Seagrave?
Yes, Norwalk Fire Department just bought a tiller. They got anything else up there?
They're looking at a few other things, but not.
What about like their own heights, do they use?
No. I know Greenwich has several Seagraves.
Yeah.
Purchase Fire Department has several Seagraves. I'm not sure about New Canaan.
Yeah, they've got a couple up there.
Will this require then additional training for the maintenance of the truck?
Nope.
No?
Currently, the maintenance of the fire apparatus is done outside vendor.
Okay.
I know there's been discussion about changing that, but currently that's how we operate for the maintenance. We have a couple vendors that we use for repairs and maintaining the vehicles.
Well, Brian, I think you have a unique viewpoint here, just kind of given your role is, because one of the questions I would ask is there sort of medium-term benefits towards having more fleet commonality in terms of the ability to source parts, maybe stockpile certain typical, brakes, whatever it is that we need to replace. If we move towards more of a common type fleet, could we bring any of that work in-house?
It is a possibility. That's something that we would have to definitely talk about, and there's a lot of things that would have to go in motion to make that happen. I'm not going to, it is a possibility. I do stock a lot of parts currently for the trucks we have now. So I do have some parts for the fire trucks, and in an emergency, we are able to go out and perform a repair, a quick service, whatever needs to be done. I'm not going to say we don't do fire apparatus in the garage. We do. It's limited to what we do right now.
In terms of the firehouse garage or in terms of the public works garage?
Some of the fire apparatus comes over to the public works garage. It's very limited on what we do currently.
Then, it's my understanding that this is 6 feet longer than the existing rescue
Correct.
truck. What are the advantages that brings, and are there any limitations that it brings?
So we're making sure that it fits everywhere that the current rescue does now. It's the additional compartment space for some heavier equipment. We've run into a couple scenarios on I-95 where stabilization was an issue with larger vehicles, tractor trailers. So we're adding some additional equipment for the stabilization of that, as well as what we used to have is an inflatable boat that would have to get taken down, put in the back of a pickup truck and brought to the scene. This will actually have an inflatable boat for the water rescues that we come across, and we come across quite a few of them every time we see a large storm here with the flooding.
And will that boat actually, is too detailed, is that going to be deflated and stored, or is it going to be?
Deflated.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a couple minutes to deploy the boat, but we've run into quite a few scenarios over the years. We do have other means of water rescue now, but this would just be an additional thing. Matter of fact, the boat was donated through a private donor. So it's one thing that I removed from the capital this year.
I saw that and I'd say thank you. They pointed out the, I forgot the manufacturer, but like the inflatable rib.
Was it a
Zodiac,
Yeah.
I think, right?
It's military grade, mil series Zodiac with a small engine.
So they've raised the money separately for that.
Yeah, back to the process of estimating the cost of replacement, if we were tracking it more accurately, we might have seen, increases that weren't necessarily steady, but maybe 5, then 8, then 12%, then back down to 6%, and then all of a sudden, this last year, I'm guessing it went up a lot, right? Like crazy, which feels kind of like the paving project that we ended up.
So definitely one thing I didn't touch base on. So prior to going to my first meeting, I made a phone call to the metal depot that I use for purchasing all our steel. We do a ton of fabrication at the shop. We build our own dumpsters for the DPW. We do installation of bodies, everything at the garage. So I contacted the manufacturer that we use up in Bridgeport, and I asked them to give me 3 numbers, 2 years ago, last year, and the current price for the same metal. From 2 years ago, everything's up 75%.
That's for sheet steel?
Sheet steel. So I was building dumpsters at the shop for $1,800. The last purchase I made, I think, was $4,500.
So, all on the paving project, I mean, how confident are we that this will remain at this price next year? I mean, I know you can't get cars right now, right? Everything's inflated because you can't even get it.
Look at H&L Chevrolet. The only thing they really have on the lot is maybe some EV cars and some used stuff.
Is this the right time to buy it? I mean, do we have to buy it? Do we have other vehicles that can respond if we've already taken it off as the first response vehicle?
So with the delays that we're gonna have for purchasing this vehicle and then having the vehicle be put in service, I stress that I don't wanna delay this process anymore. And I also don't think that you're gonna see a substantial decrease in materials anytime soon. Nor do I think the market's gonna return back to what it used to be. People are still purchasing, and I don't think you're ever gonna see the market go back to the way it was.
How much time between final approval and you're in a contract where the price is certain? Are we talking about a month?
So I have,
How much
probably
price risk are we taking?
Thursday, I'll have 30 days from Thursday
30 days from Thursday.
to lock this in.
Okay.
And you
Well,
think,
I misspoke.
Until that comes back, the exact date is tough right now because it's in the review process.
This is where it gets complicated, because I've been going back and forth with dates and numbers for several months now. So I've been tripping over myself a little bit. The last I spoke, we were gonna try to sign contract the 30th of this month. That would have given us the 10 days after this meeting. It may be the first week in January that we would attempt to sign the contract, pending approval here.
which, and correct me if I'm wrong, given that the RTM is only, is it 10 days from when we approve, or given that the RTM is already approved?
It's 10 days from when
All
all
approved?
3 have approved.
Okay.
So that's the 30th. So inside 30 days, you'll have a signed contract.
Correct.
And they'll provide.
And that removes all price risk?
Yes.
Okay.
Going back to, just one thing, going back to purchase vehicles. So currently, I've been trying to purchase several Ford Explorers. I've had 0 luck. They open up the window for a couple days, the orders get fulfilled immediately, and then I get my numbers in, and then they call me and say, nope, we've canceled all the orders. This has been going on since July. It's very difficult to get vehicles right now.
And so as we think about this, so we're going to approve a sort of up to amount tonight. You're going to receive a sort of finalized bid. I assume once you convey that the town, all bodies have completed the appropriation, they'll then, I assume soon thereafter, release a live bid to you?
That will be, I believe Thursday, will be the contracted bid with the final numbers for that truck.
Okay. And with respect to, I think, the papers, like the 100+ page spec sheet talked about the delivery date being 620 days after you finalize the bid and agree on I think there's drawings or some mechanic in there. But you had mentioned, I think at the Board of Selectmen, that you think it's actually it could be up to 2.5 years till we take delivery of it. What happens, do we get any downward benefit if the price of steel, because I assume they're not gonna start making this, it doesn't take 2.5 years to build, does it just take 2.5 years to
The process.
fit into the production schedule?
So it's going into the production line, it is probably about 2 years in the production line between manufacturing the frame to get the engine components, the drivetrain components. It'll go into a section, start to be built, get to a point. They may put out 5 or 6 of those units, and then they go back and start building the next part of the units. But we wouldn't be, it's not like they're specifically building one piece of apparatus at a time. They are gonna build several of these vehicles, the base of it together. They'll build several of them together, and then, it is a long process.
And so will this number, this 1.7 million or less, will that be a not to exceed number, or will that be a firm number?
That's a not to exceed number.
We
Well-
may have depending on what this number comes back at the pre-construction meeting that's in that contract, if we make any tweaks there's a possibility for slight price changes, depending if there's something that needs to be worked out.
Change orders or
Pri-
something like
change
that?
order.
Price would be a decrease, it would be any additional.
No, but once we sign so I think, let's make sure what you expect is the contract would be at or below the 1.7.
Correct.
Once we sign the contract, are we paying that, if absent any material changes, where we agree to change the price upwards because we're adding a feature? We're paying that price regardless of what happens to material costs over the next 2.5 years?
Correct.
Right,
That-
so that's a firm price to them, it's a firm cost to us. Right.
The actual number, once I receive the actual number, that's what we're gonna pay. I can't, I'm not guaranteeing it's 1.7.
No,
It could
right.
be less. I went with 1.7 as a safe number to work with right now. And I believe in the contract it was 1.5.
Yeah,
Do you remember?
5 was the last one that we had got.
But if the price of steel goes down 75% in the 2.5 years that they're building this thing,
We
they
don't
get the
see an
benefit of
increase.
that, we don't get the benefit of that.
No,
No, is that
Likewise,
steel
if it goes
will already
up,
be purchased?
They
Correct.
take the hit, we don't. Right.
correct.
So a couple more questions. As relates to bonding here, we typically choose to bond and effectively finance equipment not longer than its useful life. And so when you talk about the useful life of this, there's a couple different numbers that you've thrown out there. One is like the expected time before you would start the process of ordering the next one versus how long you think this vehicle would actually last. So we need to think about, do we bond this over 30 years, over 10 years, over 15 years, and so forth? So what do you think about a truck such as this? And we are moving, just to be clear, I think we're moving from what you all would call a rescue to a heavy rescue, right? Sort of, it's like longer, it's 3 axles rather than 2 axles?
Yeah, putting the heavy in front of it doesn't change what we have, and, we do have the heavy rescue now, it's just, we're adding a few components to it. It's not like we're moving in a whole different direction here.
But is the current one 2 axles?
Correct. So to add, this comes down to when we sat down for the length of the truck. Adding the extra axle actually shortens the turning radius on it, and as opposed to putting the axle all the way back, making the vehicle that much longer. So adding that second axle actually brings the turning radius up on the truck, so it would turn better and more like what we have now. That's really the only reason for the extra axle, is to be able to maneuver this truck into the same spots that we're maneuvering the one we currently have. And as far as the length of the vehicle, 20 year.
Do you think the expected life is 20 years? What about
Almost all our apparatus currently, we've been pushing on 20 years.
And about 15% of the cost is related to this additional equipment. What do you think the average life of that equipment, the additional, like the bags, the jaws of life, that type of stuff?
So the rescue equipment, I would have to say 15 to 20 years. I don't really have a exact number for you, but I would say 15 to 20 years. I mean, our equipment now is, some of it's 20 years now. There's been a few changes on some of the equipment, so some of them may be a little bit newer.
So Jen, in a situation like this, can we split the bonding, do some of it shorter and some of it longer, depending on if we
We
have?
can if we want to, if, depending on the whole issue that we do, we could say so much of it at a 15-year term and the balance at 20 years.
Okay.
Since I know we've had problems in the past with like fitting under the underpass and stuff, as I think about this new development in Norotan Heights, and you're talking about turning radius, like, are we sure that this truck can get in?
So I brought the largest truck that the town owns, I brought it over there and made sure that we can turn throughout all the islands. That was one of the things the fire marshals were adamant about when we were doing when they were doing the layout over there. We brought all three of the largest pieces, which are the ladder trucks over there. This turning radius is not longer than our ladder.
Not worse,
So,
okay.
no, it is, yeah, when that was laid out, we specifically went over there and drove all the different patterns to make sure that we wouldn't have an issue getting in and out of there.
And are there any overpasses or so forth that this truck would be limited to?
The two overpasses that we would not be able to do is the Leroy Bridge. And when I say that, you could probably get under there. You're not gonna fit a sheet of paper in between the truck and the bridge. So we're not gonna attempt that. The one that is definitely not is Raymond Street Bridge. You know, the one.
Yep.
Yep, so Raymond Street's definitely not gonna fit under the current rescue, nor the ladder fit under that. Both of the vehicles are marked with the address, that if you're on this side of the street, you need to go this direction, and if you're on that side of the street, you need to go this direction.
But it'll still fit on Post Road under the trinket.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Jim,
That's not even a question.
Speaking of useful lives, one of the points that was made in the chief's letter was that budgetary constraints prevent them from doing repairs that would otherwise keep the existing vehicle running. Should they review budgetary constraints for this coming year and going forward so that in fact they can make sure that the vehicle will last as long as it can remain in service?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point. If we're all sitting here and we move forward with this and we know that it's not going to show up for 2.5 years, I guess if there are investments that need to be made in the existing rescue truck to make sure that that can perform even as a secondary truck, right?
Well,
Like,
it's not out of service. It's still in service. It's not its first due primary truck. We've run one of the engines first due with some limited equipment on it, and that is the second truck that would come to the scene. This way you have all your capabilities on the scene with the particular two pieces of equipment. At no time have we have a standard. At no time have we gone below that standard and made this truck unsafe to go anywhere. It just doesn't have all the functions that we need. And the costly repairs that we've been putting on this thing is just astronomical. I mean, it's been eating up some of our budgets. A few years back, they came to the Board of Finance for $28,000 for additional lighting equipment to try to rectify some of the issues that we were having. It did, but more developed. But the truck's still usable right now. So, but this is a good time to move forward with getting the replacement and getting that one out of service for us.
Okay, and then maybe just not to occupy too much time here, but as we think about the truck itself, we basically pay when it gets delivered, right? When they hand over the keys.
Correct.
As for the equipment, there was some discussion in the 100+ page sort of overview that certain equipment, if they're going out to a true third party and Seagrave is not supplying it, that for that portion, we're responsible for paying it when that equipment shows up at Seagrave.
So that equipment would get delivered to us because we would be making the purchase. And when the truck's ready to be fitted because at one point both trucks are going to have to be next to each other to transfer the equipment over and mount all the equipment. That's when we would bring the additional equipment in and have everything laid out with the new truck. One of my concerns is, like the rescue tools, I did say that, we would have, I'd be able to order them now and we wouldn't have to pay for them until we receive them. I believe it was a year to 18 months, so, we got some time on that. There are a couple other items in there that I have to follow up on with the manufacturer and one of the suppliers that we use, MES. I want to make sure that we can lock those prices in now because I don't want to see an increase on any of this as far as the air cart and some of the other struts and stuff go.
But some of the other equipment you think could show up before the truck itself?
It could.
Okay, so then on that, if that equipment in totality is approximately $300,000, then we would never bond early just to raise $300,000. We would just use sort of cash on hand and then reimburse ourselves and bond when the entire truck comes. So I think Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, the equipment's small enough that we can always just kind of borrow from the
whole
reserve
truck
fund.
when it comes due, it's not gonna time out perfectly with
Yeah,
a
so
bond issue, so we'll front the cash from the general fund.
And then reimburse ourselves with it.
And then the other piece of it too is because we won't be bonding right away, we'll have time if Brian's able to sell it. We'll know what that money is, we can take that in as a revenue towards the truck and reduce what we have to borrow.
Okay.
So as far as that goes, we would be looking to put the truck up for sale. I've discussed with Sean and a couple of other people, probably about 6 months prior. I may put it up a little bit sooner, depending on the dates and everything that I receive from Seagrave when they're anticipating the delivery of the truck. We're gonna put it up sooner than later, get it on the market and see what kind of feedback we're getting. And then it would just be a stipulation that the truck couldn't be sold until the other one's in and the equipment's transferred over.
Okay. And now the sales proceeds all come back to the town.
Correct.
Right? As it relates to the actual ownership of the truck, is the truck owned by the town or owned technically by the fire department?
By the town, right?
So, yeah, you guys own the
Yeah.
vehicles. The only one that you don't own is engine 41. That was purchased by the Darien Fire Department on their own funding.
Yep.
But the vehicles are owned by the town. I mean,
Is that the brush truck, the small?
no, so we have two engines over there, the 42 and 41. 41 was purchased
Okay.
with private funding.
Any other questions?
Can we be sure that the process of tracking these costs going forward will change? I mean,
It'll be the first thing I deal with on the commission meeting in January.
thank you.
And we will definitely try to get the numbers up to date. I know that at some point you will be seeing the other two departments coming in for two engines. So we will definitely get together and see if we can get the numbers updated so that there's not a sticker shock when they come to you guys, and try to get on track with that
So you do sit with the other departments on
every month.
a regular basis?
Yep, every month.
And so the discussion about the commonality of the fleet, has that already happened once or twice, or are we? is it
So
new?
everybody has their little niche, but the engines are pretty much laid out the same. They're laid out fairly similar across the board. The rescues, on the other hand, they're a little bit different because we have different needs. The Roten has obviously the water. They have Long Island Sound, so there's a lot of equipment on there that supports that Long Island Sound as a rescue unit. But us and the Heights do have a lot of the similar equipment. And you would definitely need to have two rescues in town. Norwalk has a backup for their rescue when their rescue goes out of service. So when one goes out of service, you have to have something else to back it up. So maintaining at least two rescues in town is needed. And then as far as the engines go, we have the 6 engines in town. They're fairly similar across the board.
Okay. Well, I have a few questions on the bond resolution itself. Does anyone have any more questions for the chief? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen, on the bond resolution, I just had a question. You know, we talk about, talks about the purchase, the $2 million for the purchase of a heavy rescue. Should we be including in there the heavy rescue truck and certain fire apparatus equipment, just given that there's a substantial amount of equipment that that we're purchasing from a different manufacturers, it's not part of the truck?
No, I don't think that's necessary. Anytime you buy fire apparatus, there's gonna be some equipment with it, so it's part of the purchase of the truck.
Okay, and then just one other question I just noticed, because like this bonding resolution is, you know, likely not to be issued for 2.5 or 3 years. I noticed in these that we always say the muni legal opinion needs to come from Pullman. Is there a reason why we put a certain law firm in there and not just say by a qualified bond counsel, just to protect ourselves so that we don't, you know, if in 3 years from now.
Well, Pullman puts it together, puts together the bond.
Okay.
You know, I suppose it could be changed to be a bit more open. But I also think that if we were to change bond counsel, there would be a method for updating that, because the bond resolutions you just did for HHR have that as well. So I would say, let's not have it hold anything up on this one.
Yep.
But it's something that I can talk to council about for the next one that comes up.
Can a clause be inserted somewhere into the language that would allow us to, you know, change some details like counsel without specifically talking about, you know, pointing out this particular firm?
Yeah, I'll talk to them
Yeah,
about that.
just something that may be more generic. Again, I'm just thinking, how do we always improve this years to come? That was the only questions I had. And I think technically, if we were to make any change to this, whether cosmetic or substantial, Jen, it would need to then go back to Board of Selectmen and back to the RTM.
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Is there a motion to approve a resolution appropriating $2,006,000 for the purchase of a heavy rescue truck and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $2,006,000 to meet said appropriation?
Yes.
David moves. Second?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor? All those opposed? Abstaining? It's unanimous. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate this, and listen, please keep me updated, and I'll keep the board updated as you guys move forward. And
So, like I said before, as soon as we have further details, we're gonna reach out to them tomorrow, and we'll send over the final contract, and then I'll get with Jen and figure out when officially we can sign the contract.
great.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is the first time we're bonding for this, so I think I'm sure we'll learn a little bit from this process and continue to improve. But I appreciate all the work that you all and the other 200 plus members in this town do.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Happy holidays.
Okay, the next item is related to transfers. Discuss and take action on a request to transfer $11,500 to professional services for HR.
The HR director is requesting the transfer so that she can have a consultant do a classification and compensation study for our non-represented positions. The last time this was done was maybe 10 or more years ago. So they'll be doing a thorough review of job descriptions, meeting with the employees to discuss what their current responsibilities are, as well as a survey of 12 similar towns to get some external compensation information and see where we should line up.
And as part and parcel, if the descriptions that the employees say are their duties differ materially from what we currently call their job description. Are we gonna update the job description?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the hope is to do this on a more periodic basis.
But why are we doing this?
Couple of reasons. Over time, people's actual jobs begin to deviate from their job descriptions. We need to make sure that we are competitive for recruitment and retention. We have some need for internal review to make sure that we have internal equity amongst department heads, assistant directors, that sort of thing. So it's good to do that periodically so that you know that you're staying in the middle of the pack for your external equity. And then also to make sure that we're not deviating too much within our own structure, because over time, people will come to HR and say, I believe a position in my department needs to be reviewed. HR will do that as a one-off, and now you have one that may have changed, and you begin to lose that internal equity if they're done as one-off. So periodically, we need to do all of them and make sure that everything's adjusted.
And Jen, just for clarity, this is going to include, when we talk about sort of exempt, we're talking about like non-unionized
Correct.
employees. So that's going to include both sort of exempt and elected exempt employees.
The
Right.
elected was a little bit tricky. I'm not sure where they landed on that, because those are kind of unique with each town. Some have elected tax collectors, some don't. So Susan was gonna speak with the consulting firm that she's engaging for this to find out what they can do for electeds, see what kind of data they can collect. Especially because it is a year where salaries have to be set for the elected officials. So I'm not quite sure what exactly she's gonna be able to get for that, but she's looking into whether or not electeds can be included.
I think, Monica, I think it would be helpful if we reviewed all positions, regardless of whether they're elected or, traditionally, hired. Because I do think it's, some of the positions as an elected position, you can only hire someone that's a resident of Darien.
Well,
So-
I think a big part of this is a comparison with other towns. And so the thought for the elected is to look at the tax collector, oops, I'm sorry. TV 79 doesn't like when we do this.
To shock you.
Right, so, sorry, Jen. So the thought was for the elected positions to take a look at the tax collector and the town clerk, because in some municipalities or other towns, those are paid positions and some are elected. So a big part of this is comparing and contrasting and looking at our job descriptions and making sure that we are, consistent overall. And so those two specifics will be included in this.
Got it. And I think it's always important when we look at these positions, and even when like this board looks at every other year, like for example, we look at and we always review the first selectman's salary, and then that becomes effective like the next election year. But I know we always look at it in terms of like when we're comparing to other towns, like does that town have a chief administrative officer or not? And we look at like sort of the total number of employees. So I think to the extent we can build that type of comparison into it, I think that would be helpful.
Oh, that's absolutely what they do. They look at
Great.
direct reports, how budget amount that's managed, and it's a whole scoring sheet. And then whatever that total score is dictates what range positions would fall into.
Got it. And, I know at least the 8 years I've been on this board, I only ever recall reviewing the first selectman's salary. By charter, do we have to review any other elected?
No, the other electeds are set by the Board of Selectmen.
Got it, okay.
And to be clear, this study does not include the first selectman.
Right.
Okay.
Okay,
Right,
that's
we'll
on-
use the same format that we've used in the past.
But will it include the Board of Finance members?
Yeah.
Yes. It'll take a lot of work for that.
Overpaid, underworked.
What was the,
That's your answer.
what is the AO/SUP professional services account that's being used for this?
That's it's like a central services account that Kate manages. It's administrative officer / support services. And in the budget, she specifically put in the $5,000 for these types of things, because we found some kind of a study usually comes up that we want to conduct throughout a year. And so she started putting money away. This was the first year she put the money away, and we're able to use it towards this.
Got it. And will this also look at retirement benefits, pensions, all of those?
No, strictly salary. I mean, it will compare, they'll consider like what's the whole package that somebody gets, because, you know,
Yes,
that kind of
that's-
factors in, but all we'll be setting is the actual salary, and there won't be any recommendations on retirement package or other benefit package.
Okay.
Just to ask an odd question, is there any risk of mission creep where one's job goes this way, another's job goes that way, and leaves a gap in terms of functionality and getting things covered?
I don't think it's necessarily gonna look for that. I think that will come down to the individual department heads when they review what proposed changes are to the job descriptions. They'll have to make sure that all the department responsibilities have a home.
When they look at when they're, the survey part with the other 10 towns, hopefully 10 will respond, but that's not, that's not guaranteed. They'll be looking at the job description, and so what they will be able to say is, we're pretty close, but this is how we're different. These are the main points that we, we do it this way, or we don't do whatever that way, so. And there's just a small other part, I'm gonna say this because if we go forward with this, there was a discussion, our HR Susan Barksdale did discover that New Canaan was also in the process of this, and so we were able to, this survey that goes out to everyone, to save about 10% on this. New Canaan and Darien are kind of meeting up, and we're sending one survey that will cover the full spectrum. So like a Venn diagram, like some of us are in the middle, but some are over here and here. And so in the future, that might not, play out like that. But right now, we were able to achieve some cost savings. Susan Voss.
How did you find out they were doing it too?
Called?
You did?
No, she talked to the director.
she did?
Yeah,
Great,
yeah. She's very on top of this.
nice.
Well, I guess it's okay to work in New Canaan if we're saving money, right?
Did we pick a vendor yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Are there multiple
Okay.
vendors, or is it just that one?
Susan was able to identify two, and so she asked each for quotes, and then this one that happened to already be getting started with New Canaan was the one we decided to go with.
Very experienced. So,
Okay, well. Someone want to move the item?
Yep.
Rob moves. Is there a second? Taylor? All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous.
thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Monica. Next is the financial report.
Everything is looking very good. On the revenue side, property taxes are where we would expect them to be at this point. We're coming up to the next collection period, and we've started to see payments roll in. Some people like to get them in before the end of the calendar year. So those are coming in, and we don't foresee any problems on our collection rate. On investment income, we've collected almost $300,000 more than our budget. Just a reminder, rates are up significantly from when we put the budget together, so Joan is looking at this all the time. I think she's still projecting $700,000 to $1 million for the year. And I think you have her most recent portfolio report, but that is doing very well. On the other hand, town clerk, which we did bump up $200,000, we bumped the budget up to 1.8. That is slowing down a little bit, and we're seeing a bit more volatility in the monthly collections on their real estate transactions. So through the first 5 months, we have collected about 50% of their budget, but I think that one is going to end up being a lot closer than we've seen it the last couple of years, because there is definitely a slowdown in transactions. And then building permits, we budgeted $57,000 for redevelopment projects, and so far we've taken in just under $14,000 on that.
And just
then-
quickly, you mentioned property taxes. Do the auditors do any sort of a control review of the property tax
Yes.
effort that's done to make sure that they're using best practices and all?
Yes.
Good.
They don't always agree, but we have very limited staff, so we have difficulty with separation of duties with such a small staff. So there are some recommendations that the tax collector hasn't been able to implement just because we don't have the staffing to do so.
Just have to put Rod to work, Rod.
Tell me when you need me.
On the expenditure side, things are progressing as expected for this time of year. We're not seeing any signs of anything running hotter than we would expect. There's really nothing of interest in the other areas. I will call your attention to page 5. The fund balance at the bottom of the page, 7/1/2022, is still not a final audit number, but that is the amount that we have for unassigned fund balance in our draft audit, which should be finalized this week. I'm just waiting for them to send the final format, but we're looking at an unassigned fund balance of just under 27.5 million, which is 17.27% of the adopted budget, and about $8.4 million in excess of the 12% minimum.
And this compares to last year. I think we were I talked about it in my State of the Town discussion of like 26.2, is 26.3?
Yes.
So we're up about $1.2 million, $1.3 million, despite paying for basically all capital, non-bonded capital items out of that fund. And I think that's, again, I sent you guys around my report, but I made some comments about, over the last few years, the large surpluses that we've seen in our operating budgets coming back in have sort of increased the general fund faster than our spending or use of the general fund on capital assets. And so we've seen that continue to grow. And so I do think, like, as we think about this budget season, I think it's important to budget as close to what you can expect it as possible, so we don't continue to see large surpluses come back in. And, like this, the general fund is getting high relative to our, minimum threshold of 12%. So it would be good to, I think it's just gonna be incumbent on all of us as part of this process. Let's make sure budgets are budgets and expectations, and I think shying away from having kind of reserves baked into a lot of these. We have a $27 million reserve.
So I think we typically look at budget forecasts for the next fiscal over what was last budgeted. And we look at changes to the budget. I don't recall looking at the delta to what was actually spent. We generally look at the budgeted number for fiscal 23 versus the projected budgeted number for fiscal 24 in our upcoming budget cycle. And we look at the differences. But we know that the town spent $1 million less than what was actually budgeted. We expect that the town will spend about $1 million less than what was actually budgeted for fiscal 20. We know that in 22 is what happened, right?
Correct.
So I don't know if we need to modify or if that information is as readily available, or we just need to change the way we think about it. Because we ought to be looking at projected budget to actual rather than projected budget to approved budget.
How much do you all use? John really liked that master budget spreadsheet that had prior year budget, town administrator, year-over-year budget change, dollar and percent. If you use that, we can drop another column in there just so we can look at percent change over actual.
Yes.
That's a really good idea.
That's exactly
And
what
then-
I'm
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Since
Drop
it goes
that
out to you,
column
then
in.
you can play around with it
Yeah.
and see what
Done.
you think is significant.
And the other question I would ask is you mentioned the 2.5% guidance that is coming up. Should that number, it's too late now, I guess, but does that number take into consideration the surpluses that were generated, such that in fact you don't need a 2.5% increase in those areas where they didn't spend the money they had last year?
Yeah, I mean, that guidance is around actual. Like, how how much do we plan to spend next year versus what we're, let's just say, actually on track to spend this year, sort of on our core services. And I think, if you look at it right now, I think the Board of Ed was was running close to 900,000. Now they used a few $100,000 of that for the security, so they're net 600, but even that's growing a bit. Last year on the town side, there was close to 500. Now that was largely associated with I think we were down 3.5 to 4 officers, right? So that money just kind of sat there. But I think in the state of the town, I put together a table that basically shows this is where the budgets are today after reforecasting and, you know, the hiring and some of the contracts that were agreed to and so forth, versus what we spent, what we were originally projecting and what we spent last year. So I think it's important to look at, I think, particularly I think on the Board of Ed side, where are we today versus what we actually spent the year before.
So you're suggesting an increase of 2.5 over actual, not over last year's budget?
Well, and is it over fiscal '22 actual, or is it over projected current year actual?
Well, I think the idea was to try to give, what do we think is prudent, given inflation, contractual obligations and so forth, to see actual spending year over year go up. In terms of how we budget, both operating budgets should try to budget as close as they can to what the actual should be. They shouldn't be not budgeting for items I know we need, and we shouldn't be sort of, maybe padding is a negative word, but we shouldn't be over budgeting for items. We should be budgeting exactly where we need to be because we have a $27 million reserve.
So I think incumbent upon us is to identify, with the help of the the town and the Board of Education and the schools, where those surpluses are occurring and if they are predictable. Like if it's the same departments that are generating surpluses year over year over year over year, whether it's intentional or not, it might just be the type of spending that department has might be more, might have more fluctuation in it than certain other departments. Not trying to, cast aspersions here, but if there's commonality, then those departments we should be taking a harder look at.
And I think that's right. Some of them, like we mentioned last year, it's sort of hard to predict whether we're going to be under, below or optimal force on the police force or not. And I think if you look at the Board of Ed, obviously like the largest, 75% of our budget. This year, while they have significant surpluses, the majority of it fits into just less kids. So there's been less teachers that they've had to hire and so forth. As there's always attrition, there's rehired less. And then the other one is while the board got dinged a bit through the legislature proposal that brought us down to 70% reimbursement rather than our 75%, because overall spending per pupil is down. The threshold, the 4.5 times threshold by which you start to receive excess grants.
This is special excess cost.
Excess cost reimbursement,
Yeah.
That threshold was lower, so therefore we got reimbursed, or we expect to get reimbursed 70% of a larger number.
The threshold would be lower if you had fewer students. It's 4.5 times your net spent per pupil. If your number of pupils went down, your NCEP would go up, so 4.5 times your threshold.
So I've asked that question because I think when we discussed other things, we talked about sort of what is the cost of a marginal student, the last student, right? And it's far less than the average student, right? So if you remove a student, that the savings should be less than the average. So I think I've asked them to relook at it. Part of it, I think, are aides and paras and so forth, which they haven't been able to source, which isn't sort of directly proportional to the student population. But I think there are some things where it's hard to predict. Okay, things like student population, right? That's going to move up and down by 1%. But there are other areas, I think, where there are surpluses and where we could probably do a better job projecting. So I think those are the ones throughout this process we should focus on. Where are there things where we are creating serial surpluses?
This is a sort of in the weeds type of question, but are surpluses measured before amounts are reallocated to other funds, or are they measured afterwards? Where do they get picked up?
On our side, it's afterwards because it's at the end of the year after all transfers have been made.
So therefore, there
Where
could
do
be
they
a
end up?
huge surplus, but if they manage to send it elsewhere, it won't show.
Correct.
Still,
You'd have
But-
a history
yeah.
of transfers.
But we could track that.
Yeah.
But also,
We
for
should.
the,
And
we
approve
really
it. We
only
approve the
transfer
transfers.
into departments
Yeah.
from contingency. Other than that, it's just transferring within
Department.
departments themselves, so the bottom line of the
At the town
department.
side.
Yeah.
But if you take like for instance, this 5,000 out of
AO support.
conferences and put it into this other, whatever, the actual spending as reported in that conferences line item, will it be 5,000 or will it be 0 because it got transferred
It will
somewhere
be
else?
0 because,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it looks
if-
like it was used for that
So
purpose.
I do think we should be looking at, when we look at the new budget number, we should look at that. What is that versus our adjusted budget? What was that versus the original budget number? And then what was it versus last year's actual number?
Yeah.
I think really like in that spreadsheet,
yeah, we can add.
I think those are the
The
three.
spreadsheet is not at the level of granularity, like, we're not talking about being able to see this at a line item.
You're not gonna see it in line items, it's rolled up to the department level.
Yeah, but I think that will be a little bit of a, sort of the tip of the iceberg, if we see certain departments
Right.
having,
Yeah, but I mean, how hard is it to add more to the,
It would be extremely annoying.
to add more granularity.
We have 900 line items.
no, I know, I mean, but the portal is,
The
Leaves
portal
much
is
to be
exportable, we can have a lesson on that. I do not wanna maintain the portal as well as a 900 line spreadsheet that has the exact same
Yeah,
information.
I agree that the spreadsheet should remain at sort of 900, maybe with selective increases, right? If we needed to add an extra one line or two, but then we can always go back and look at this analysis through exports if we want to drill down deeper inside one of those lines. I have asked the Board of Ed to deliver a similar type of, show us what's your adjusted budget versus your original budget versus last year's actual. Compare each of those to what you're asking for in an upcoming budget, because I think that'll help. So I think if we could look at the same thing on the town side, again, what the boards are asking for versus what their adjusted budget, net of all the transfers are this year, versus what their original budget was last year, versus what they actually spent the year prior. To me, those 4 columns, if you will, I think are the ones where we could really uncover, best uncover trends in spending and if there are any trends in surpluses.
We can do that. I'm thinking, let me think about your question and how we can easily,
I definitely don't want it to be hard. I'm just thinking, when we look at the whatever you call it, portal, the one glove, whatever the hell it's called, government.
open
Open
up.
Gov.
Open,
Open Gov,
thank you.
yeah.
And we're scrolling back and forth, and I'm like, I can't even find the data that I actually wanted to see. Like, if there's a way for whoever generates that, I mean, if we have the information, it just flow in. We just have to tweak the, like the writing of the code, whatever that
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
populates. What?
It doesn't work that way.
Okay.
So the spreadsheet and OpenGov are not, they don't talk. But, because the spreadsheet was developed well before. But what we can, there's a couple things that we can have a lesson on OpenGov. We can either do it individually or group. There's some, you can pin columns. If you're not interested in something, there's ways to hide columns, so you don't have to scroll all the way over. You can reorder columns. So you can customize your view so you can see the things that you want to see. That may make it somewhat easier
But
to
then,
work
does
with.
that mean you're manually entering in the spreadsheet the data? Because where's
Yeah.
that? It is? Aye.
Yeah, there's no commonality in the fields or anything.
So-
But
so-
we can make OpenGov as user-friendly to you as possible. And,
I
because
could
you only
use it
work with it
to-
once a year, so,
Yeah, I'm never very good at it.
yeah. So
It's
it doesn't have to be as frustrating as it is. We can certainly work with that, and that may help you with some of drilling down and seeing some of that granularity. But also let me think about an easy way that we can export the data, make it available to you so that you're not exporting, fighting with it. If you're all gonna want the same information, why export it 7 times? So let me think about that. But let's start with putting it into the master spreadsheet for the town administrator's presentation. Then take a look at it with these 3 comparisons against the request, see if it pops out anything that you want to look at more, or if you think you want to look at all of it more in detail, we'll go from there.
But Jen, you enter in all those 900 numbers, right? Effectively into the spreadsheet.
There's not 900 numbers in the spreadsheet right now because it's rolled up to the department level. But yes, I put in the department totals.
Got it. And ultimately, we have capital items in there and so forth that we look at year over year. So, and that spreadsheet already has, like, for example, when we sit down and we do it this year, we would have the actual from 2022. We, of course, have the budget, the original budgeted number from
Yep.
fiscal '23.
And the revised.
And we would, you're just sort of entering into, I guess, at whatever point we start the budget cycle next few weeks, you just enter in the adjusted, right?
Yeah, we usually cut it off out of 12/31,
Yeah.
just so we have a solid 6 months.
And then we have the new budget. So
Yep.
this just will allow us, typically we show our percentage increase over fiscal '24 proposed versus fiscal '23 adjusted.
Right.
And I think we're saying we just want to have a couple extra calculated columns, which are percentages over
And
the others.
that's no problem.
But not
That's,
over adjusted over actual.
well, we're gonna show it
We're gonna show
against
it.
Okay.
adjusted, adopted, and prior year actual.
Yeah. So there'll be 3 sort of percentage changes, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
To compare the proposed budget against.
Right, and so what I'm suggesting is that at Kate's level, why don't I send out a version of the spreadsheet? You can play along at home as Kate's doing her reviews. And before it gets to you with the Board of Selectmen, we can talk again and see if you want that spreadsheet to show things a different way, or if it is or isn't revealing what you're hoping it will. And we can tweak it before we send out the Board of Selectmen's recommended budget to you, so that you're ready to really dig into it and work on it.
And the list of transfers is easy to find somewhere, but I don't know where. How do we?
Well, that'll just be the difference between the
Yeah.
original budget column and the adjusted budget column. When we look at that difference, it'll show what the transfers have been year to date, or for the first 6 months of the fiscal
Right.
year.
I mean, if you want a list, we can always provide that, that's.
Yeah.
not
Well, this whole thing will be a
Just
work
thinking
in
like this
process
example.
anyway.
Yeah.
So we don't have to get everything done.
Exactly.
uh,
I think we have a couple of changes that will roll out to begin with, and we'll adjust as we go along, and
Maybe we as a group can think about some type of threshold, right? For any department or area or something where the difference between budgeted and adjusted budget, where that was greater than either 20,000 or 10%, something like large, then we can maybe look at,
well,
dig into
Well,
the.
it depends on the
One-
size of the department.
Yeah.
Well,
Because
that's what I was
sometimes,
saying.
yeah, a $20,000 delta in a certain department might be not even worth discussing at the board level. But in another department, it might be, a 50% delta toward expected. So
So-
I would hesitate to set any kind of, because I think it's all relative to
That's
which
why I think you look
department
at-
we're looking at.
well, so rather than just adding in the percent columns, why don't we put in the dollar and percent
Yeah.
for each of those comparisons?
yeah.
See if it's meaningful for you, and then what's meaningful is probably different to each of you, what you consider significant. And each of you is gonna have your own areas of review also, so.
Right.
I think it
Right.
might tell you where you wanna dig in deeper, and then we can have
Right.
some review on how to make
Yeah.
OpenGov as easy to use as possible.
Yeah, so when you've identified the spot, you can go to OpenGov to find the
Yep.
answers.
Yeah.
That's
A 20% move in the harbor master budget is like $500.
That's my
So
point.
that's what we
Right,
want to
exactly.
make sure we're not wasting
Exactly.
time on that, so. Okay.
Well, if we're talking about surpluses here, are we willing to address the 25 basis point haircut on the collection rate as well? Because that's a large dollar amount of the surplus.
Well, I mean, we should be looking at both revenue and expenses, where we're either positive revenue, expense surpluses, or either one on if we're off on revenue or expenses, we should be, as accurate as possible. And listen, some of the things, when you look at it, the last 2 years have been very difficult to predict the the clerk revenue, just given the sheer volume and unpredictability of real estate transfers and so forth. And some of these building permits have been very hard to determine which fiscal year they're gonna flow into. But I think there are other things, like that's a great example in terms of, can we do better? Do we need to tighten up?
Yeah,
that
I'm not
further?
thinking about eliminating it, because I like the conservative approach, right? We'd always rather be conservative, but it might warrant reevaluating, is 25 basis points the right number, right?
Do we have, in January, we should probably talk budget assignments before the town administrator puts out her budget. But do you want to have one or two members assigned to the tax collection rate as a standalone budget assignment?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we always have a couple of people assigned to revenue. I guess the question
So,
is,
I would say, I think that we might want to change that approach, because years ago it used to be that revenue was just kind of revenue. But on our development side, we've really been working to make the departments accountable for their revenue estimates, because they know best what's happening in their world. So I would recommend that the revenue reviews be part of the departmental
Right.
review,
Okay.
instead of one general revenue. So maybe whoever has general government could also be tax collection rate.
maybe we'll create a little additional category, even though it's not technically a budget category,
Yeah.
that'll cover general fund usage.
Yep,
General fund / expected surplus usage, and include things such as like the tax collection rate, and/or, actually, Jenna, I don't think we bake any growth into the grand list. We're just using straight off the October grand list, right?
in the tax collector's budget, she budgets for supplemental motor vehicle and supplemental real estate. The two combined come close to about $1 million of revenue. And she bases that off of what she's seeing as supplemental stuff coming through from the assessor's
But we don't budget
office.
anything for grand list growth associated with sort of kitchens and bathrooms, right?
No, that would be
Pools.
captured in the supplemental.
Yeah, okay. Well, then, maybe it should be supplemental, maybe just understand what she's doing there, the collection rate, and use of general fund as a few of us to think more acutely on that, so we're better prepared at the end.
I kind of thought last year in the budget, when we reviewed departments, if there was a revenue element attached to it, we looked at it.
Yes.
That's what I remember too.
Yep.
That we did it the way you suggested. We did that last
Yeah,
year.
so
Yeah,
I think
and-
we stay with that.
But I think there was some confusion, because then someone was also assigned to revenues.
I think we overlapped on it,
Yeah.
if you want to call it
Yeah.
that.
So if we just,
Yeah, I think we
Make
stick
it
with.
So
what we
let's
do.
make sure we break the revenues up down there, if they're gonna be sort of at the bottom, and we put the same, maybe you need to break out some of the revenues so that, just in that spreadsheet, where you put the two people that are assigned to the expense side, to the revenue side.
So-
But there's only a certain amount of departments that have revenue, right?
Right.
Parks and Rec, I mean, it isn't like a whole lot.
It was pretty straightforward last
Yeah.
year.
yeah, and I was
Yeah,
gonna
let's
say,
just
do
say
Parks and
you
Rec or-
use
yeah.
Yeah,
the,
let's stay with that.
do you
Let's just
use
do
the
what we did last year.
spreadsheet to review that, or are you picking it up from OpenGov?
I used OpenGov.
Yeah, open gov,
Okay,
yeah.
I want my book back.
no.
Damn it.
She'd be happy to give
Yeah.
you a lesson on OpenGov.
And just, if you're responsible for a department, you're responsible for the department.
Right, there's
You
an
know,
expense
the
tab and a revenue
Stuff that
tab.
comes
Get
in
it
and
all.
stuff that goes out.
I just want credit that I asked you, and you shot it down maybe in 2 seconds.
What we can do, and I did last year, I can format the 900 line one to print out, so that if you want to have actual numbers where you can take notes on, you can do that.
It'll just be in like an 8 font.
The other thing too
That's
is
my goal.
when we have the assignments and we say Dan is assigned to land use, we can have, do they have expenditures, revenues, and we can mark, just so that nobody misses anything and they know, oh, I gotta look for both.
And we talked about this,
Yeah.
and let's make sure that the assignments equal the open gov
Yeah.
department name.
So
Because
I
there's been some
cannot,
confusion
I
with that.
cannot guarantee that the Board of Selectmen calendars are going to refer to them the same way,
Yeah.
but ours will.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Okay, well, anything else, we kind of got sidetracked a little bit here looking at surpluses. Anything else on the balance sheet side, or?
The only other thing that I wanted to touch on is on pages 9 and onward, active bonded projects. We're waiting to finalize Ox Ridge, and what I'm hoping is we have some active projects that are ready to have some bonds issued for them, and I'm hoping to be able to do just one bond issue, that's Great Island, as well as all the odds and ends that we have to do. But I am starting to prepare for that. They may not be able to match up, and we may have to do 2 separate bond issues, but that's where we're going with that. So I would expect a spring 2023 bond issue for non-Great Island stuff. And then Royal Roof, we included that in the HHR appropriation that you amended in November. I was just waiting to hear back from Board of Ed on an encumbrance that they had, if they had finished all their invoices. What you'll have next month is a cleanup of that. We'll rescind the authorization, and we will transfer already issued funds to cover the $16,760 that they've spent, that's shown on page 11. We can grab that from the Hindley or Holmes roof, where we borrowed more than they ended up spending.
So we'll see a closeout of all 3 of those, the homes?
No,
Right?
not necessarily, because on Holmes and Hindley, we have an estimate on a state grant, but they don't have a final amount yet. So if we get less than that state grant, I don't want to have transferred too much out, and then we have to transfer back in.
Okay, so effectively, we'll wait till we get the state grant number, and then it'll close out because it's been rolled under HHR.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Well, Royal is no problem, but Hindley and Holmes are standalone projects.
Yeah, I got you.
So those will still be hanging out until we get the state grants.
All right.
And Jen, do we track anywhere on here what the actual balance of the general fund is, net of any bond appropriations that we have approved and haven't yet bonded, and we've been borrowing from the general fund, just so that we know I'm just thinking like a couple $1 million for a fire truck and other types of things. Like, do we know what the actual balance is versus the unassigned balance?
Well, so when we get the unassigned balance, it's already factored out if bond funds owe money back to the general fund.
Well,
It's
so-
already
but the-
factored out any due to funds.
But do we know how much is actually in the general fund?
Yeah, 27 million.
That's the unassigned balance.
Right, so total is maybe 29, because we have about $1 million of committed on purchase orders at the end of fiscal '22. Some other small funds that we have closing out in this year's budget, prepaid items.
But what about non-bonded projects where they're just drawing down from the general fund?
That gets factored out when we do the fund balance statements. There's a capital projects
Yeah.
fund column that accounts for those. So,
So my question is, how big is that? Because
Um,
we can only borrow so much from the general fund, right? Because it's only,
it's just a matter of how much cash we have.
yeah.
We
So
have-
do we track that, or?
We keep an eye on cash balances so that we know, like, HHR. So we don't have a cash flow for that yet, but we want to borrow something because they're going to get moving, and we don't want to front $10 million from the general fund versus $2 million for a fire truck. That's no problem for us to pay and then get reimbursed. So it's kind of based on size, but fund balance itself is just a point in time calculation. What's
that
really
shows
more
how much
meaningful
is-
is cash in the
And that
bank.
shows how much is due from bonding?
Yep, it accounts for that in the calculation of the fund balance.
But, okay.
Jim, when you mention other unbonded capital projects, is there any use to us reviewing the list of other capital projects that have been approved in prior years on which there's been little to no activity here?
Yeah, that'll come to you
Yeah.
Closeouts.
in like February, March.
Okay.
as
I've
we
asked
get
the Board of
started on
Ed,
the
for
budget.
example, like with the track's done nothing. It's been like 2 years now.
So things like, I'm thinking like Edgerton, the sidewalk from the EMS.
Yep, those will come
post
before you
50
again in the spring.
Post 53
Or-
over, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
All right, great.
Yeah, before you get into your budget, so that we can determine if you want to close any of those out, have them go into your reserve so that you can use that reserve to fund fiscal '24 capital. We have that all kind of timed like February, March,
Okay,
as you're going into your review.
good.
Okay. Any other questions on the financial report? Okay. Next item is minutes. We have 3 different minutes, 2 regular meetings and 1 special meeting, all in our new format. Any questions on any of these? Jen, can we approve them all at once?
I don't see why not.
Okay, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes of our regular meeting on October 18th, our special meeting on November 10th, and our regular meeting on November 15th. Dave moves, Rob seconds. All those in favor? Unanimous. Special assignments. Left to right. Dave, you want to start with
HHR?
Yeah.
A lot of things have been going on there. We are now through the second phase of design. Tomorrow, the design development phase will be presented to the HHR building committee. Both the actual designs, the drawings, and the costs related thereto. I participated in a meeting this morning of the smaller sort of budgetary group to go over the numbers. In aggregate, across the 3 schools, the project is still slightly under budget. The Holmes project is slightly over budget, and Henley and Royal are slightly under budget. But the design team, meaning the architect and the construction manager, believe that for this phase, it's consistent and ready to move forward to the construction drawings, which will be the final drawings that will be used in the final submission to the state. The state has been briefed heretofore and has, we got the application in with everybody's help for the expanded scope of work. So that's all fine. All that's been done. They are up to speed and comfortable with where we are for the process here so far. So that's all set. There are some other elements that as we go into the construction drawing phase where there may be some incremental cost saving opportunities. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but there are there's some hope there. There's still some moving bits, particularly with the drainage related issues at both Henley and Holmes. And there are some material potential cost savings related to the engineering components for how they join the new addition to the old building in terms of, it's some engineering thing that I don't 100% understand, but it has to do with the way that the footings tie together kind of thing for the support of where the join comes together. The budgeted line item was fairly large, which of course caught my attention. So that should be good. And we expect to have the construction drawings finalized, finalized, estimated in time for submission to the state for the final application for the grant in March, and we'll be going out to bid at about that time as well.
Anything on Oxford?
Nothing really new on Oxford. The assembly wing is, you'll see steel beams up now and concrete board. I said it's a steel concrete phase. It's still kind of basically in that phase. So just a month of progress along those lines.
Okay.
All good though.
Paul, anything on pension?
We have a meeting in early January, so no new news.
Okay. And will that meeting sort of generate what the
The
what the contributions will be that flow into the budget?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. Both for the Board of Ed side and
yeah.
Board of Selectmen side, okay. Rob, anything on technology?
I was gonna start with audit.
Oh, okay.
Anything on audit?
The draft is complete. I sent them all of my markups last week. It took a little longer for us to get the draft than we've had in the past. One thing that I do want to make you all aware of, we had a last minute, Kate and I had to make a decision to reclassify. I'm not sure if the auditors will include anything in a management letter on this, but it also impacts our fund balance. Last minute, the town aid road grant, which we've always budgeted, not always, but for the last several years, budgeted into the capital fund to support our paving program. Kate and I had to make a last minute decision to reclassify that as a general fund revenue. It's about $300,000, just because there were some bidding requirements that we were not able to satisfy as part of the paving program, but we can use it for support, general support of our roads maintenance crew. So to make sure that we were satisfying the grant requirements, we moved it over to general fund, said that it was supporting just DPW expenses in the general fund. So going forward, we'll probably see that we may just decide to make it a general fund revenue and always use it that way, just to eliminate any quirks related to which firms were able to contract for paving. Because they have women minority-owned requirements on those funds, and we can't always satisfy that. And if we can't get a waiver, then we would have a problem with the grant.
Reclassifying won't jeopardize the grant.
No, because it's still an allowable use.
Okay.
It was just on our books that we said, no, we're gonna move it from one fund to the other.
Okay.
And how does that classification, whether it's in a capital fund versus a general fund, how is that affected by?
Well,
Like by how we can use it?
so we just try to have the revenue go into the same fund where the expense is occurring. So since we pay for capital pay for paving out of capital, we've been sending it into the capital fund, which just reduces what
Got it.
needs to come over from the general fund. But if we switch it and make it a general fund revenue, there'll be more revenue in the general fund, but we'll have to increase the transfer over to the capital fund.
But there'll be less restrictions.
Yeah.
But it'll still come back to a capital item. It has to be used for capital.
No, it can be used to support salaries for your road maintenance crew.
Got it.
Or just, general plowing overtime, that sort of thing. And since it's our own people doing that job, we don't have an issue with who we're able to contract with in the event that we can't satisfy some of those requirements.
I do, it sounds like we should probably decide, go forward to keep it in one versus the other, because if we
Yep.
put it in the general fund, then it's technically a revenue offset, right, to the Board of Selectmen, like the operating expenses of the
Yeah.
town, versus if it's in the capital, it's effectively an offset to the capital expenses, right?
Yes. Which brings down what has to be transferred from the general
Yeah.
fund.
But in terms of tracking, I guess, the net operating budgets year over year,
If we're using it to support the road crew, it is offsetting the general fund expenses. But that was a last minute change, and I'm not sure how they're gonna address the fact that we had a last minute change like that. I'm not sure if they're gonna view it as significant enough to include in the management letter, but that's what we had to do and why. We didn't wanna risk having to turn the money back to the state.
and the 27.5 does reflect.
Includes that, yeah. So what I'm gonna do this year is, so we ended up being shy $300,000 of revenue in the capital fund last year because we moved it over to the general fund, which means we kinda had more in the general fund than we would have expected. But at the end of this year, we'll do a true up, and we might need to move more from the general fund in this year than was budgeted to make up for what we didn't have go in there last year.
And how does that work? Because we typically haven't used general fund balanced dollars to support operating budgets.
Mhm.
Would this, if we wanted to use this 300 towards an operating expense offset, would the agencies view that as we're using?
No, because it never fell to fund balance. It was a fiscal '22 revenue,
Got it.
that is still
Okay.
treated as a revenue.
Got it. Okay.
You're still on pace for final sign off by the end of January?
It should be by the end of December. We haven't requested an extension.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Great,
So they have a couple days to get it to us.
okay,
But
perfect.
the expectation is that it'll be done by the end of the calendar year.
And then we'll set up a call for Gemini and Taylor,
Yep.
right, the usual, for an hour with them.
Yep.
Cool. On the IT, hopefully this committee got IT surveys. Actually got some pretty good responses. I think the number is about 100. And we're in the process of kind of sorting them out and quantifying them, because there was a lot of questions, as you guys saw. So we'll have those out by early week of, first week in January. So I'll have something to talk about at the January meeting in terms of what they look like. But thank you for if you participated and sent your results in. But like I said, we got 100, which I think we're pretty happy with that.
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
good
it was at least
response.
100 the last time I saw. I
Yep.
don't know if I got a final number. I got a giant spreadsheet. Like you saw it, right?
Yeah, you think you gotta scroll to the right on OpenGov.
And was that sent to
Yeah.
all employees and all sort of elected officials?
Yeah.
Is everybody with an
No.
at Darien account or no?
No, I don't believe so. I think we've kind of limited it. Was, do you remember off the top? Elected officials, certain members of Board of Education. I think the list was, gosh, I'm gonna say, for some reason I'm gonna say 600 off the top of my head, but that feels high. I'll get you specifics, how many it was sent to. But yeah, a lot of sorting. Like hundreds of lines. That's it, that's all I had.
Okay. Well, in terms of chairman's report, I'll keep it short here, but the state of the town was last week. I was the last presentation after a very, very
10:20.
long RTM meeting. So if you were awake at 10:45 at night last Monday, you would have heard me. I sent you guys all around my presentation. In terms of guidance, I talked about sort of, we traditionally had said, core growth that reflects, same services, same students, sort of year over year. We traditionally, for the last few years, I'd said 2.5%, and I continue that as my sort of what I call like long-term guidance. But in terms of short-term, in recognition of some of what we're seeing in, for example, like the teachers' contract that was just negotiated, and for example, like the price of steel to build dumpsters and fire trucks, I'd said 2.5% to 3%, an extra basically 50 basis points in the sort of near term, which could mean 6, 12, 18, 24 months. And then for long term, I also adjusted that up if you include sort of new initiatives and so forth. Rather than 3, I said 3 to 3.5. I made a number of comments too, I think, in terms of talking about budgets around surpluses and the importance to budget like right on the nail, because if you need additional amounts, we have a general fund, and we've proven that process, whether it's for the town or for the school, we can move efficiently through that. I think other things I talked about, and I think these are things that the chair of the Board of Education also hit on in some of his comments. Constantly as we're looking to sort of add new programs, we need to constantly be reevaluating the programs that we have in place. And I think it even came up, like just using the Board of Ed as an example, during their curriculum planning, they're talking about adding a couple of new languages and getting rid of a few other languages where they're not necessarily in demand or haven't been in demand for a couple of years. And I think we need to, as a town, I think, continue to evaluate, like, what are we getting the highest ROE or ROI on, whether it's on the operating side or the capital side. And so that was one of the topics I hit on. There was a little bit of discussion at the meeting as they were talking about the security officers that the Board of Ed brought on. There was some talk, from a very high level about whether the process was circumvented or by the Board of Finance not appropriating an additional $296,000 into the Board of Ed's, sort of $110 million budget, because this wasn't, whether that somehow obfuscated or took any say away from the RTM. I think that was sort of one of the topics that got brought up. I reminded at the end of my discussion I just made a point to remind all the RTM members and generally the public, like we do have meetings, we have public comment at the beginning and sometimes during all of our meetings, and we have an email address that we put out there to always accept it. And that one meeting in question, there was a total of 0 people in the audience, other than a couple members of the Board of Ed who were answering questions and so forth, and we hadn't received any email comments in. So I sort of encouraged them that when they do have questions about something that's coming in front of us, please reach out, whether it's individual members of the RTM, whether it's sort of committee chairs or the general public. We're always happy to receive input, either in person or in writing. So that's it for, from my point of view. Is there any new business or other topics? Okay. Well, we have a full budget season come up in front of us. I'll work with all of you guys on budget assignments and so forth, and figuring out sort of where everybody wants to stay in the same, or sort of, we did a little bit of switching last year in terms of giving some people some new looks on areas, and a couple, we're going to talk about sort of reviewing the collection rate and so forth. So I'll get that out in the next couple weeks. So on that, is there a motion to adjourn? Rob? David seconds. All those in favor? We're adjourned.